I'm Nick Richmeyer, and this is Dam's Given, a podcast where we explore how to free your venture from the extraction economy, realigning it to the timeless ways that humans build, collaborate, and become. So one of the things we sometimes hear is a really reasonable question, which is like, well, what is all this trust-made stuff? Like, what is a trust-made decision? If we were actually to implement something you want us to do, or if we were to lead in a trust-made way, according to Nick, your program or your ideas, what does a trust-made decision actually do? And I think this is really important because one of the things I both love and hate, and we have a video about this on the YouTube channel, one of the things I both love and hate is about naming this trust-made growth is the crazy thing about talking about trust is as soon as we start talking about it, you don't trust me. Because I have to talk about it, it seems like, well, if you had to talk about trust, what does he really mean it? So, if I had could turn back time and call it something else, I probably would, but it is what it is. At this point, trust-made growth is what it is. And as soon as we're talking about trust, we lock up a little bit, right? It's the same as when you run into a business and the top thing on their value statement is we have integrity. You side eye that a little bit of like, well, if you have to announce it, or like you get an unsolicited email and say, hey, this is not a sales email, right? So as soon as we're talking about it, we lock up a little bit, but we do have to talk about it so that we can get smarter about it. And to understand what trust-made does, we first have to talk about the physiological thing that the absence of trust does. And the absence of trust, the sense that I'm not safe here, and that's all we're talking about when we talk about trust is, am I safe with this person? Am I safe in this space? Because neurologically, back here in our animal and reptilian or mammalian and reptilian brain, we're just tigers running around going, should I be here? Should I be here? Should I be here? Is there food? Is there danger? Is there food? Is there danger? Right? All that neurology on the back half of the brain, which is the faster part of the brain. If you go back to like the Kahneman and Tversky material, all the behavioral economics, that's the faster part of the brain. So it's moving faster than your analytical brain can go. And your analytical brain gets real tired real fast. So it goes, yeah, fine, do it your way. Right? So that back of the brain is making all these decisions so hyper fast. And one of the things it does when it decides that we're not safe, we have to remember that almost everyone in the world, unless they've done an enormous amount of personal work, is oriented in some way, a little bit or a lot, to the world with the belief that it's not safe. There's just a general bias across your buyers, your employees, your future hires, that the world is not safe. And what's happening around them is not safe, and people who are interacting with are not safe. We have bought into things are not safe narrative, right? So those little neurons back there are really ready to be fired up. They're like sort of sitting there waiting for proof of the bias that things are unsafe. So what happens in the brain when it's unsafe? Well, the biggest thing that happens maybe not the biggest, but important to our discussion that happens in the brain when we feel unsafe is we start turning off data. So we start closing the sensory data. And our senses is just electrical signals into the brain to go, hey, here's information, do this what you will. But here's the thing. What we know is that really good decisions come from a really robust pool of meaning. And that pool of meaning, the bigger it is, the more robust it is, the more multi-perspectival it is, the more interrogated and curious it is, the more likely we are to make a good decision. So we are really dependent on, first and foremost, those little electrical impulses coming in and going, hey, here's more information. And we're also dependent on other people, which is our probably largest source of additional data, is other people. Well, when we're in a position of mistrust, as most people are, based on the data and based on lived experience, just think about your life, we're shutting down inputs, right? We're talking to fewer people. We don't actually believe people when they say things. Everybody sounds like the internet now. And so if you sound like the internet, we're like, oh, you're just a troll on the, all of that starts to trigger that closing down of information. And quite literally, our brain is going, I'm in danger. So if I'm in danger, I just need to focus on the danger. So I start turning off anything that looks like danger. And the phrase I use for that is closing the aperture. And the aperture is like the the pokey out point of a camera, like if you're making a movie, and the aperture decides how much light gets in. And that decision, that mechanism of how much light gets in is the aperture. And so what we do is our brains close the aperture and go, we're letting less in so that I can focus on the danger, which is why people start to perseverate, over obsess on things are bad. You're going to harm me. I can't trust you. What's your real motive? Cynicism, internet irony poisoning, this thing that's very popular now of just, I'm going to go on the internet and I'm going to be sort of side eye snarky about everything, and that's my personal brand. All of that is really sophisticated, socially approved ways to communicate distrust. And I mean, I know people are making money doing it. I know that they're building, copywriting businesses and personal branding businesses by being the king or queen of internet snark. And it can work, but at the end of the day, it is a manifestation of distrust, which is why we probably should do less of it. A little bit of it, a little humor here and there doesn't hurt anybody, but probably should do less of it. So when we say we want to be trust made, what we mean is we want to open that aperture. We want to let in more information. And trust-made behaviors do that. So let's use some examples. One of the things that we teach in the training programs is something called a notice meeting. A notice meeting is sitting down with someone, asking curiosity questions, letting them tell their stories. As they tell their story, you can say, hey, tell me more about that. Or, oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before. What happened then? What happened then? Right? We get there's an infamous quote, we'll put it in the episode notes, of that listening is so close to being loved that for most minds it's indistinguishable, right? So when we're being listened to, our physiology goes, oh, that feels like love. I should open up, right? Because what does love do? It opens us up. It makes us more accessible. So if any of you, all of us have been in those kind of situations, right? Where someone's asking us good questions and we feel heard, right? And we all of a sudden like, why am I saying this? Right. We had this situation, we'll refer back to a previous episode. We had this situation with one of our podcast guests where he literally wrote a newsletter to his 30,000 newsletter people to say what Nick Richmeyer got me to say that I wasn't planning on saying. Well, it's a little bit of an affirmation of this methodology, is that when we lean in and when we're genuinely curious, people's little neurons go, this is fun. Let me open up, and we open the aperture. Now, opening up is both saying more and being more disclosive and being more transparent, but it's also seeing more. And then you're able to notice. And so this doesn't happen every time, because some of us are still, people are lost in their own challenges and difficulties and whatever. But you'll notice, right, if you've sat down and had somebody listen to you, you are much more prone to go, oh my gosh, I've been talking about myself this whole time. What about you? And you're feeling curious and you're wanting to know more about them, and you notice what they said. You notice what they were wearing. You'll notice when you go home, you remember more about what the coffee shop was like and what the food tasted like and what they were wearing and all of this data, right? Because all of those senses are taking in more information. What a beautiful thing. So now that pool of meaning, the thing that we use to make decisions, has all these fresh streams running into it. We have other people's perspective that we're willing to hear because our barriers are down. Our literal brains are taking in more information, and we have a more robust pool of meaning that by which we can make better decisions. And when we're making better decisions, we are by definition more trustworthy, right? So it is the thing we're always after, which is a virtuous cycle. A vicious cycle, everything that happens incentivizes us to make it a little bit worse. And then something happens and it incentivizes us to make it a little bit worse. We're awash in vicious cycles. Social media is by definition a vicious cycle. It is the slot machine nature of the attention economy is a vicious cycle. So what we're looking for is everything we can do in the way that we run ventures, in the way that we build teams, in the way that we sell, in the way that we market, is to build virtuous cycles. So that every decision goes, oh, that was a good decision, I should do more. Oh, that was a decision, I could do more. And that's what TrustMate does, is it helps organizations figure out what do all the people involved, all the constituents that we want to build deep relationships with, employees, capital, existing customers, new customers, who do all these people, they all face the venture from their own needs and vantage point. So it's not a problem that team members and investors want different things. That is normal. They have different incentives. They're coming to the business looking for different things. The question is, can they learn to trust each other? Because they're all connected to the venture. The reality is, existing customers and new customers want different things because your existing customers are anchored to what your business was like when they hired you. And it's not like that anymore. One of the things I say all the time is that nobody outgrows their onboarding. So however you onboarded somebody, that's what they're anchored to for all of time. Now you can shift it a little bit and there's a little bit of angling room, but this is why people are constantly grandfathering people into old pricing and grandfathering people into old processes and whatever. It's also the reason why it's so important to be hyper specific on the kinds of customers you want to bring in and their psychological framework, because you're going to get good at serving a certain kind of person. I'm not talking about your ICP or which vertical you're going to be in, or, oh, I work with this industry or whatever. That's a different conversation, not unimportant, but different. What I mean is you have to build a commitment to, we're going to be good with people who are a little bit cynical, kind of intelligent, have good relationships, right? What are the psychological frameworks of the people that you're going to be good for? Because those psychological frameworks are going to respond consistently to certain behaviors. And if you don't do that, then you're having to play whack-a-mole. This is in the book. Rule number 4, the customer is wrong. If you build out this complex network of very different customers who want very different things and make decisions in very different ways, you are built to disappoint them, because you can't make all of them open the aperture in all of their various different ways, right? So the job of the venture is to get all these people with different needs and different wants and different perspectives to get in on a team together and go, yeah, let's effing do this, right? Existing customers, new customers, team members, capital, partners, and the community in which you embed yourself, right? All of these people are, best case scenario, that we're locking arms and we're doing this together. Well, to do that, we have to have all of them on some form of a virtuous cycle to be more and more trusting as time goes on. One of the things the 84 Nodes of Trust does is it looks at the points for each of those constituencies and goes, do they have what they need? Are they getting stuck, right? Do they have what they need to move the next level of trust, the next level of trust, the next level of trust? Is what we're giving to the group A over here to help them move along disruptive to group B over here? And how are we going to resolve that, right? So we're teaching ventures and organizations and leaders to think about these things in network ways, to think about everything through the lens of relationships. Because once we think about everything through the lens of relationships, we have the potential to move up that virtuous cycle. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed. We're going to slip. We're going to slide down a little bit, right? There's going to be challenges, but it gives us the potential to do that over time in how we market, in our sales scripts, in product design, in the way we define roles and rules of organizational behavior, in the way we build culture. All of these things become manifestations of these little decisions that produce virtuous cycle. And the way we know a virtuous cycle is every time somebody hits a trust node, every time somebody hits a place where they could trust us more, they are validated in that. So they open the aperture a little bit and go, I should do that. I should do more of this. And they do a little bit more. And then we validate that. And then we do a little bit more and we validate that. And it may feel really, really, really overly detailed and taxing when you first start thinking about it, but then it becomes a way of being in the world. Because again, we've talked about trust-made growth as an ecology. It's a way of building soil that is self-generating. And once you really get a handle on it, it just becomes a way of doing business and a way of thinking. I'll use a very specific example of how this can work. So we've done a lot of work with firms who are in various forms of M&A. It's a big M&A era in various businesses. That's a different conversation for a different day. So they've either been bought or they are buying or whatever. M&A is not bad. It's important. It's part of how industries clean out, overlap and confusion. It's part of how we simplify value, where value has become overly complex. There's a lot of important things that consolidation does in a healthy industry. There's a lot of things that consolidation does to start to dismantle an industry, and that's a conversation for a different day. But we're going to focus on the positive here. So the positive M&A is it does some of this sort of systemic cleanup in an industry, in a category. But the reality is the experience of an acquisition or a merger at its core, without good attention, without care, is fundamentally trust breaking. It just is. If we aren't proactive, it reinforces those little threads of distrust. Now, really clearly, because I don't want people who are coming at me and be like, well, you hate M&A. It's not true. You just have to understand that things left to their own devices, if we don't take good care of them, are essentially trust breaking. So we've worked with a lot of firms through M&A processes where I'll use one specific case an example, although this could apply to many of them. When we're in the process and the selling group, the selling leaders, the selling founders are on their way out and they're trying to make decisions about going back to customers and how they're going to communicate that and helping really make that emotional transition, right? Where something old is dying and something new is being birthed in its place. And when we're in that kind of a process, when the customer's in that kind of a process, they need help. So we're building a strategy with the selling founders to provide that help. Instinctively, most selling founders are like, but I'm good. My clients love me. I just need to tell them to love this new thing. And I get that. I'm empathetic toward that. That is your lived experience. And I'm not here to tell you that your clients don't love you. But what we have to understand is that even when we're going through an experience with someone who we love or someone who loves us, like a spouse or a partner, and the situation creates massive amounts of change, bad shit can go down, right? And it does strain our capacity to trust. We do start inherently closing the aperture as humans. Not because you're bad, not because you did anything wrong, but it's just a closing the aperture sort of an experience. And so because of that, we have to show incredible amounts of care. So when we're in this conversation, one of the things very practically we're doing is we're blocking out each set of clients and making sure that we have a coherent series of experiences that's true to their lived experience. So whatever how did we get here? This block of clients. What's their relationship with the founder? Well, how are they moving forward? What products and services have they bought? How are they at risk? Do they have more products and services that they could buy if they had a better relationship, right? We run the clients through a matrix of where we think they are, and that produces sometimes 4, sometimes 8, sometimes 12 chunks of clients or customers going through an M&A experience. And then we ask ourselves, okay, given the psychological state, the operational state, both of those factors of this body of clients, what do they need to move forward? And then we set a very simple set of steps. Sometimes it's 2 steps, sometimes it's 3 steps. A lot of the steps are repeated, but they're slightly different depending on the group. And that's what it means to move through something in a trust-made way and to start to build that musculature. We don't lean into our limited experience, right? And by limited, I just mean you're a human and your experience is limited. So the fact that my experience says my clients trust me and they're good and they love us and they just need me to be like, hey, it's going to be great. That is your vantage point, but we got to move the camera over here. And by moving the camera, then all of a sudden you might see like, oh, they do love me. And here's other information. Here's more information. And then we build a more robust pool of reality, pool of perspective. And from that, make operating decisions that then build trust. And that starts to become a way of thinking about things. And a lot of times what you'll see in what I just described is a go slow to go fast. That there's a bunch of slow decisions early on that feel a little bit meticulous. But that's how trust works, right? We trust people who really think about the impact of their decisions. So we go a little slow to think about the impact of each decision so that we can put a decision plan in place and then act on it swiftly and not second guess ourselves every step of the way. Most leaders have been incentivized, too many leaders have been incentivized to do it the other way around. It's like, oh man, we got to solve this. So they go into firefighter mode. Fire, fire, fire. And they move fast and produce second and third level consequences that just make more fires. Not intentionally. They don't mean to. They're good people for the most part. You, sir, listening to this call, you may not be, but most of them are good people. And they just don't understand how to build a process to cultivate trust as a virtuous cycle in the organization. So we went a lot of places on this episode today, but I wanted to kind of take us through this big vision of actually what is the pragmatic reality of becoming trust made? How do I move from understanding that people are resistant and we have 40-year decline in trust to actually making decisions, and what should I expect those decisions to fundamentally do inside the walls of a business? So hopefully you got a sense for that and you have a better idea of what your next trust made decision might be as you go. Hey, thanks for joining us. This has been Damsgiven, and if you want to dig a little deeper, as always, head over to damsgiven.com where you can subscribe, get more material, ask questions, even grab a quick call with me. Everything we've covered here is part of the TrustMade growth ecosystem, my framework and method for leading ventures into this new TrustMade era. You can join our community and find training opportunities to learn TrustMade growth at trustmadegrowth.com, or work with me and my team directly at my strategy firm CultureCraft, found at culturecraft.com. We'll see you next time.